All right, thank you all. Thanks for coming to the last session of ClioCon delivered by somebody who is not even remotely famous. I've been given a whopping half an hour to talk about a topic that I care deeply about and have been working on for 10 years. So I'm going to do my best to give you as much information that is going to be useful and actionable as possible. But I'm also going to bounce over the top of a lot of things, and I'm going to do it intentionally. The good news is I've got a podcast. So yeah, I'm plugging my podcast right out of the chute. But I've created, on some of the slides, there's a little icon at the bottom, and I go way deeper on all these things in various podcast episodes. So if you want to know more, look up the Agile Attorney podcast, and you'll see the episode numbers on different slides. And if something piques your interest, go check it out. All right, so who here regularly or maybe all the time feels overwhelmed by the volume of work in your law practice? Yeah, it's a very normal thing. We are all drowning in work. And a lot of the systems that we build, a lot of the technology, a lot of the tools, a lot of the folks down in the exhibit hall are selling products that are designed to get you even more work. Right? And that's okay, right? I mean, more work is good. You want to have work. We don't want the work to run dry. But we do want to be more intentional about how we work within our capacity personally and our firm's capacity more broadly, because there's actually some really useful relationships between that capacity and workload that will help you get work done more smoothly. So, anyone using a Kanban board, and that's a funny word, right? So when I first started doing this, I was warned to please stop using these funny words. You'll scare lawyers. They have their own funny words. They don't want to hear yours. I am a lawyer, by the way. I'll get to that in a minute. But I use the funny words because I want you to be able to Google them, right? I want you to know that this is a thing. It's out there in the world. So who here is using maybe any of these tools, right? Obviously, Manage, specifically within Manage, I'm thinking of Stages, right? That's a Kanban board. Clio Grow uses a Kanban interface, right? These are all down here on the left. These are all our legal specific tools that use Kanban interface. It's not an exhaustive list, but lots of them do. How many are using one of these ones in the middle? Sort of a general purpose, public facing Trello, Asana. Yeah, sorry, the lights are so bright that I can barely see the hands going up. So I saw a few in the periphery. Right, these are great. They can be really good. I know, I've helped a lot of teams with Trello. Way back when I worked with a Palace law firm, which is, I think, still using Trello to this day. It can be good stuff. Anyone using any of these tools down here? Yeah, not likely. Okay, so these are the more robust sort of agile Kanban methodology type tools. And the ones that I really use a lot are Kanban Zone and Business Map. They're the ones, when clients come to work with me, those are my go-tos. And I'll show you why in a minute. So again, you're probably familiar with this cards and columns interface at this point. It is kind of revolutionary, right? This idea that, I can actually see my work visually instead of running down this Excel list. Right? I can actually have some context as to the flow of work. And again, without diving too deep into the weeds, the Kanban methodology had its origination in lean or lean manufacturing. And so one of the things we're doing with this Kanban interface is we are creating a visual fiction that makes the process of our legal work operate a little bit like a factory floor, where you can see the widgets or the partially completed widgets moving from the loading dock on one end and through the various stations where work has to happen and then out to the shipping dock on the other when you have a final work product. Unlike manufacturing and those widgets, right, where you can actually see them, most of the time with knowledge work, we don't see our work, right? I mean, we might see the documents on a screen, but for the most part, it's very ephemeral. And so there's something kind of magical about being able to actually see your work in the context of a workflow. Here's the thing. The Kanban method is so much more than just the Kanban board. And I know this is an overused meme, but I still love it. This is a board that is one of my clients, and there's some things about it, and I won't dive deep into it, but we have queue columns, right? So there's sort of these different buffer stages. We're talking about a drafting way. This is an estate planning workflow, by the way, right? But I've done it with litigation. I do it with lots of different types of teams. Some columns don't apply to every single matter. Tax planning isn't part of every estate plan. It's part of some of them, right? We have a drafting. Then we have actually call out the quality assurance phase, right? The document review. There's another queue there. We call out the client review phase, and then the signing and the wrap up. But we, again, have these stages of the floor. We're also using these swim lanes as the name for these horizontal stripes, right? To get some different context about, oh, hey, this is our hot lane right here. These are the things that absolutely positively need attention this week, right? This is the other stuff that we know is ready for work, and we'll try to get to it. And then these are things that maybe we know we don't need to touch for a week or two, right? How peaceful would it be to know that there's a big chunk of your cases that you don't have to pay any attention to at all for a couple of weeks? So using some of these tools, some of these advanced sort of methodologies inside of the Kanban method can be really useful. And it's not to say that just building a basic board isn't great, because it is. It is game changing, but it's only getting you to sort of the first plateau, and the mountain is actually really tall. There's a lot of places to go with it. So very briefly about me, I'm a lawyer. I'm actually a fourth generation lawyer, so it like goes deep. I had a technology career before I went into law practice, so I learned a lot of crazy ops and project management and product management type skills, and then got into law practice and was able to use those. I had a copyright and trademark practice that I liked fine, but I found that I liked working on practices more than in them. So about 10 years ago, I started consulting for some other law firms and actually some in-house departments. And about 6 years ago now, I flipped to doing that full time. So I've been doing it for a while. I do still have a lot to do with legal stuff. I help co-found and I'm the board president of a nonprofit law firm called the Commons Law Center in Oregon, and we do a lot of really cool stuff that I don't have time to get into today. I also co-chaired the Futures Task Force of the Oregon State Bar and sat on the Board of Governors for a number of years, and so I have a lot of opinions about legal regulation and have worked to do a lot of change in regulation. And one thing I will say is if you have an opportunity to go sit on a bar committee or run for your Board of Governors, it's a lot of work, I won't deny it, but we need you in bar governance, because otherwise the status quo will perpetuate forever. We need the change agents. So my first call to action is go get on those horribly boring sometimes committees, because even just one voice of innovation is enough to break the mindset of, stare decisis, we're going to do it like we've always done it. Okay. Personally, so I have a business called Agile Attorney Consulting. It's mostly just me. And I have made it my mission to help legal professionals of all kinds harness modern ways of working to build practices that are profitable, sustainable, and scalable for themselves and the communities they serve. I have a big access to justice bent. It's part of why I do what I do. I used to have those three words in a different order, and I came to realize through work with one of my clients, and actually I talk about it in this episode 21 of my podcast, that they really do go in order, right? Because if you don't have a practice that is profitable, then by definition, it's not sustainable, right? You can't do that for very long. But the thing that's really interesting that I learned over time, and I hadn't thought of it this way before, is that you have to focus on sustainability before you scale. And another way of saying this is you can't scale your way out of a sustainability problem. And there's a lot of folks, and again, even some vendors downstairs that are maybe trying to convince you that that's a good idea, and I'm telling you it is a terrible, terrible idea. You've got to be sustainable first, then we can work on growth. I've got this slide up to show you. This is a 500-page book about the Kanban maturity model that I read so that you don't have to. I know it really well, right? But inside of this maturity model, there's actually 7 levels of maturity, starting at maturity level 0, which they define as oblivious, which I think is a little bit pedantic, but that's where it comes from. And then you can work your way up through various levels of maturity, and there's some nirvana that I've never seen anyone ever meet. But that said, every little bit of progress you make along the way is really beneficial. And I would say even my most advanced client, and I've got a client that I've been working with for 9 years now, they're probably only at maturity level 3. So there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of benefit to be gained from each incremental step along the way. The other thing that I'm showing here is the 6 sort of core practices of the Kanban method. Making work visible is the thing you get from a basic Kanban board. So that's where we start. I'm going to not necessarily read off the rest of these, but we're going to hit them in some context here through the rest of my slides. I will say on this bottom left one, so whoops, got to figure out which is the thing. I won't go back, but we care about flow in the Kanban method. Work is not just a thing that you have to do, right? Work is something that comes from somewhere. You maybe need raw materials, you maybe need tools, you need skill sets, and then you do your thing, whatever your magic happens to be in the process piece, but then it also goes somewhere. And we really try to think a lot about setting up systems and tools and policies and procedures and practices and values and mindset so that we are getting work to flow. Because let's face it, very few of you have the kind of practice where someone is hiring you for the joy and fun of working with a lawyer, right? People, it's not like going to Disneyland, it's not shopping at Nordstrom, right? People hire lawyers to have an outcome, and all things being equal, the faster you get them to that outcome, the happier they're going to be, right? Speed is an unfair differentiator. And so when work is flowing, then generally we're going to have clients that are happier. So getting to this slide, right? So my tip number 1, and again, this is going to be counter. This is I have a lot of advice that kind of cuts against some of the conventional wisdom here. But in order to grow your capacity, you don't do that by overstuffing your capacity, right? You've got to figure out exactly how to establish flow within the capacity that you have, and then we can take steps and run experiments to try to grow your capacity and increase the flow, increase the volume of work you can do. So put another way, one of the things from, if any of you saw Joshua Lennon presenting the legal trends report, one of the conundrums that he talked about is, we're still only billing the 2.9 hours a day, more or less, right, on average. But law firms are handling 20% more work than they were in 2016 when they first started reading the report. So why aren't we making more progress on the billable hours? Well, it's actually because we have 20% more work. There may be a lot of efficiencies that people are gaining from using Clio and tools and stuff in the ecosystem, but that's getting overwhelmed by the additional volume. So, to touch on that briefly, right, the more balls you throw into the air, the more different items of work that you're trying to have, the more time you wind up spending on the spaces between the balls, all the little administrative overhead tracking tasks, and the less time you spend actually carrying and moving the balls themselves forward, right? We talk about WIP, and one of the things, of the 6 practices is establish WIP limits. WIP is an initialism that stands for work in progress, or sometimes work in process. Lean and agile WIP is a little different from lawyer WIP. So lawyer WIP is a term that some firms use to refer to the lockup rate that we're talking about now in the trends report, which is hours that you've tracked but you haven't put on a bill yet. And that is a form of WIP, but that's just a really narrow slice of WIP. So what I mean by WIP is something you've committed to do, right? And that might be at the matter level or that might be at the task level. And you've actually started on that commitment, but you haven't delivered yet, right? And so when you have it started, but it's not delivered, you've got to track it. You've got to keep tabs on where it is. And every little ball that you throw in the air is adding to those tracking costs. So one of the things, and I know there's a few of my clients and former clients in the room, and I say this to them all the time. Step 1 is you have to create for yourself an honest reckoning with your capacity, right? And that is at a personal, individual level, and then that is also at a team level. What truly is our capacity for delivering work? Notice I say delivering work, not doing work, right? I want to deliver it. So honest reckoning with capacity, that is a really, really important first step. It's also really hard, right? So we want to make sure that we are continuously having that honest reckoning, that we empower our teams to talk about whether or not we're being honest about our capacity. It actually, there's a phenomenon of human cognitive biases that we're better at judging other people's capacity than our own. All right. Again, a couple of the unofficial slogans of the method, right? One of them is start less to finish more. Another one, and this comes from a lot of folks that I've known who have been in the military, but slow is smooth and smooth is fast, right? Meaning if you don't mess up, if you get it right, it's going to get through faster because you don't have to have rework. And then stop starting and start finishing. That's another, again, similar way of saying the same thing. The other anti-pattern, that's sort of another jargony term, but it's one I like and I use a lot. So an anti-pattern is something that everybody does even though it's not optimal. So this focus we have in the legal system and legal practice on utilization rate, I think is completely misguided, right? High utilization does not create flow. You can be really, really busy without being productive. So I don't have to ask which of these two freeways would you rather be driving on, right? Which of these freeways is any one unit of work more likely to get to their destination faster? So utilization rate, going for that high level of utilization is an anti-pattern, and it actually cuts against your ability to establish flow in your practice. All right, second concept, right? I've mentioned this a little bit already. You probably already have too many commitments in your practice. And so another one of the phrases I use all the time is close the closable. Find the things in your workflow that you can ditch, that you can get rid of, either by finishing it and moving them out the back, or maybe not letting them in to begin with, or maybe finding those ones where, the clients had a homework assignment for 6.5 months and they can't figure out how to do it. And you just say, I'm sorry, I'm not in a position to help you anymore. Right? If this is your Kanban board, how can you possibly tell which one of these matters you should be working on next? Right? There's no way. It's too busy. There's too much in there. You can't do the flip side of the honest reckoning with capacity, which is the assessment, the brutal assessment, I sometimes say, of priority. So in terms of close the closable, right, my hot tips, number one, don't chase intakes. For the most part, for most practices that I'm around, law is still a seller's market. I do think that there's maybe, as Damian Reel talked about yesterday, there might be some opportunities where that might flip eventually, but it's not where we are right now. So you get to be choosy. You get to decide what are the right cases, right? Creating these Fisher cut bait inflection points for your clients. So if they're not playing along, if they're not doing what they need to do, that's okay, but they don't have a right to have you as your lawyer. You can close the closable on that one. On the flip side, right, work your tasks all the way to done. Don't get partly done and then put it down and say, okay, I'll come to it tomorrow, because future you is not a reliable resource. Sorry, right? Work it to done. Focus on monotasking as best you can. And that's true at the task level, and that's really true at the matter level. When I first built Kanban boards for my clients, one of the places where work pools is that, we're done doing all the legal work, but we haven't closed it out in the thing yet. And this is really true, right? Your matter is only mostly done. Close the darn thing. Get it done. Because several things happen when it's done, right? Number one, your client's happy, right? And again, they're happy when you finish the legal work. They don't necessarily care if you close it out in Clio, but you've delivered it, right? So the client's happy. Number two, you've probably gotten paid. Or at least you're on the fast track to getting paid. But the most important thing for me is you have made that capacity available for other work. And that's why we want to get matters closed. Helps if you create a definition of done. So a definition of done, and I'll talk about a definition of ready too, it's a form of a quality standard. So again, one of the 6 practices is make policies explicit, right? We want to be really clear. These are our standards of quality. So when we create a definition of done, what we're actually trying to do is say, okay, we have delivered a quality X, right, whatever it happens to be, a motion, a will, a pleading, a immigration binder, right, when the following 8 things are true or accounted for. right? And be really clear. And then for each step along the way for building that product, whatever it happens to be, right? We want to be really clear, what's our definition of done for this task? The definition of ready is the flip side of that. So one of the other anti-patterns is we have shiny object syndrome. And so a new matter comes in and it's like, oh, I want to get started on that. If you get started on that, but you don't have all the information, and so you've now invested your finite capacity on this thing, and then you get some information and you think, oh, shoot, I had to do that differently. Well, now you've just created rework, and rework isn't flow, it's backflow, right? So we don't want work to move backwards. We want it to very smoothly go. I often use the scientific term of, I want the work to whoosh through your systems, right? We want to get that feeling of once you've done everything, right? I will sometimes use a kitchen metaphor, right? If you're cooking a recipe, once you've got everything started, the last thing you want to do is realize, oh my God, I've got to stop this and go to the grocery store for eggs, right? It's backflow. Okay. I'm going to actually blow past this one because the 30 minutes is going even faster than I thought. But I'll say it quickly, right? We think we want efficiency, and we do, but you don't find efficiency by looking for efficiency. If you look for efficiency, what you'll often get is corner cutting. So what we want to do is start with the definition of quality, and that's that definition of done, and then the rest of these things cascade almost automatically. So once you know what that quality standard is, you and your team will begin to standardize your outputs against that quality standard, which means you will have more consistent work product, which means that you will often have more different people on your team that can achieve that outcome, which allows you to do load balancing. And when you're load balancing, that frees up capacity within your practice. That excess capacity, right, like in the freeway picture, allows the work to flow more smoothly, and that's where you get the efficiency from. But you can't just go find efficiency by looking for it. So here's a very brief example of a definition of done. Notice I write it in the past tense. And I like definitions of done that are written in the past tense because now when I click the box, I know for sure that that is done. I don't have to worry about it again. All right. The fourth one, I'm going to get close to through this, but I'm going to give you an abbreviated version. This is one of my favorite topics. And I will say, right, at this point in your ClioCon, I'm sure that your brains have been jammed with hundreds, if not thousands, of tips and tricks for improving the flow or for improving your practice in some way or another. And I will tell you that most of those tips and tricks probably work, but I will also tell you that 98% of them won't work for you right now. And the reason why, it has to do with bottleneck theory, or sometimes the theory of constraints. And so what bottleneck theory tells us is that in any complex workflow, there is only ever one part of the workflow that is constraining the flow of the entire system. It's limiting the whole thing. There might be different parts that are balky and sticky that you don't like, but only one of them is the worst, right? Every chain has a weakest link. So if you accept that as true, there are two corollaries that also have to be true, right? The first one is that if you can improve the flow of work at the bottleneck, you can improve the flow of work through your whole system, right? It makes sense. The other one also makes sense, but it's really hard in practice, which is any improvements you make to parts of your system that aren't the bottleneck won't help. And so I'm giving you permission to not have to worry about all of the things that are wrong with your practice. And there's lots wrong. Anyone has things wrong with their practice. It's never perfect. So what you can do instead is try to find where the bottleneck is and work on that. And that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. Working on other parts of your practice can actually be problematic, because if you work on something that is upstream and you improve the flow upstream of the bottleneck, you're likely to put more pressure on the bottleneck and actually make flow worse or cause something to break, right? And my caution here, and again, with apologies to some of the great legal tech companies downstairs, your bottleneck is never intake. It's never intake. And what's worse is intake is always upstream of your bottleneck. So if you try to improve the flow at intake, you're probably going to make your overall flow worse in your practice. And then, of course, if you're downstream of the bottleneck, it doesn't matter because it's just going to be starved for work, right? The bottleneck is limiting what can happen. So there's lots to go on in bottleneck theory. Obviously, I've got a lot of podcast episodes that talk about it, but this is the one that kind of gets in there to the meat of it. One other way to think of it, and sometimes this helps for people, is improving parts of a chain that aren't the weak link make the chain heavier but not stronger, right? So you're actually adding to your administrative burden. You're not actually helping things. All right, real quick, I just want to use this to point out where bottlenecks typically form. Client homework is always a bottleneck, always one of the worst bottlenecks. The other one where bottlenecks form is internal QA, right here. It's not too bad in this firm, partly because that was the one we worked on first. But their bottleneck here is clearly client homework, pending info to draft and client review on the documents after they've been delivered. One of the things that I've been working on with a lot of my client firms that help with this is to create a client roadmap and actually let them know what's coming. And this is actually for the administration process, not the planning process, but it's the best graphic I have, right? Making it really clear up front. This is another thing that came up in the legal trends report is clients want road mapping. They want navigation help, right? And so this is a great thing for your client. It also is a great thing for you and your team to understand what are we trying to deliver in what phases and what promises are we making to our client that we better deliver on. So this can be really useful. All right, I've got 2.5 minutes to talk about flat fees, which is the part that I furiously added this morning, since it's clear that we are trying to emphasize in the age of AI, augmentation, and everything else that pivoting to flat fees is going to be pretty important. The biggest problem is that threatens to throw even more work into your system, right? More smaller pieces of work which have these administration costs. And so we got to be really clear about how to do it. One of the things that I do all the time, or that I see all the time, is everyone thinks, oh, I got a flat fee at matter. Don't flat fee your matters. Flat fee the phases of your matter, right? Think about what can I do? How can I define this in such a way that it's really clear what's the beginning, what's the process, what's the end, what's the deliverable, and then we'll loop back with the client and we'll figure out, okay, what's the next phase look like from here? The other advantage of doing it this way is you gain information in the early phases. You don't commit to a flat fee on phase 2. You might give them a range, but you say, oh yeah, phase 2 is going to be between $3,000 and $8,000. We'll know more when we get there. And then you use phase 1 to get smarter so that by the time the start of phase 2 is ready, you can actually say, oh yeah, I can do this for 4. And it's really clear. So that's inherently agile in the approach. Another way I talk about it is figure out what parts of your practice are sheet music and what parts of it are jazz solos. And for the parts that are sheet music, those lend themselves really well to flat fees. And then when you're doing phased flat fees and you come to a part that you need a jazz solo, that's the hybrid that Joshua was talking about. And you can leave yourself capacity to be able to do that deep work, that complex thinking, that creative analysis that we are all good at and probably is the part of lawyering that we like the most, right? But we're accelerating the flow of work at the sheet music stages so that we can do more of the jazz solo stuff. Real quick, right? And I'm not going to get to all the, well, maybe I will, in 30 seconds. Right? Flat fee offerings behave more like products and services, which means that it's useful to use product strategies for designing and delivering them. Another challenge I see is once you have flat fees, especially if you're hybrid, you have both flat fees and hourly, your profit model is different. And so you have to understand profitability by product line. Don't let how you performed on any one widget in your widget factory determine how you feel about the whole product line, right? You need enough volume to get useful data in order to do this. And then I say tie flat fees to a deliverable whenever possible. Really quick, I'm going to talk about profitability killers because I'm so close. Scope creep is the number one. So when you define flat fees, you've got to be really clear about scope. That's way easier when you're doing your flat fees on a phase basis than if you're trying to do it at the matter level, right? Because who knows what's going to come up at the matter level. But you have reasonable ideas, right, based on your skill and experience and what you learn from the client, what phase 1 is going to look like or what phase 2 is going to look like. Rework is the killer, right? So I mentioned it once already, right? That's backflow. we want to make sure that we really get everything we need before we get started, because we're trying to, right, again, the basic model under a flat fee is to deliver a high quality product with as few hours as possible, right, as opposed to using all the hours you need to produce a high quality product. Delays are a flat fee killer. Another reason to break it down into chunks, because things change over time. And so you want to produce your flat fees and create your flat fee offering in such a way that the likelihood of something coming in, some new information, or the client getting cold feet, or whatever it happens to be, you compress the time frame, therefore you compress the risk. And then, I hate to say it, but hourly billing targets are the death of flat fee profitability, right? If you're motivating effort, but you're rewarded by efficiency, you've got tension there, and eventually it's going to cause problems in your practice. So as you begin, and I'm not saying dump your hourly comp plan immediately, but as you evolve, if you're evolving into anything that's not hourly, right? And if you're contingency, you know this already. If you have subscriptions, you know this already. If you're flat fee, you know this already, right? Yes, we want to make sure that we are being efficient and that we know what's going on under the flat fee, but you can't compensate your team based on that, because they're going to be motivated to sandbag, and that's going to kill you. I'm available for questions after, because my time is up, but thank you all. I hope this was useful.